I never thought a quiet Tuesday evening in a bookstore could feel like the edge of something I couldn't quite name yet. She was sitting in the far corner, knees tucked under her, sprawled across an armchair that had seen better days. The golden lamp above her cast a warm glow on her hair, streaked now with silver that caught the light in a way that made me pause again. I was shelving new arrivals a few feet away, pretending to be absorbed in organizing paperback thrillers, but I was stealing glances every 30 seconds, at least. She looked up from her notebook and caught me looking. Instead of embarrassment, she gave me a small, almost imperceptible smile, like she knew exactly what I was thinking, and I immediately looked down at a book I wasn't reading. Her name is Claire. She's in her mid-40s, which I notice only when her laughter wrinkles the corners of her eyes, or when she talks about things she's experienced that I can barely imagine yet. There's a confidence to her, the way she leans back in her chair, one leg crossed casually over the other, the notebook balanced on her knee, the pen tapping a soft rhythm. It's effortless, and I can't help but feel clumsy next to it. I'm Jonah, 23, working here part-time while trying to finish college. I like books, yes, but I think mostly I like the quiet, the excuse to be near her without having to say too much. She makes it hard to be quiet, though, because every little thing she does feels loaded with something. Earlier, she had asked me to help her find a rare edition of something obscure. We wandered through the stacks together, the space between us measured, careful, yet electric. She brushed past me at one point, and the air between us seemed to hum. I caught her hand for a split second as she grabbed a book from the top shelf. She didn't pull away. She didn't comment. She just kept looking at the book. But I swear I felt a spark, a little jolt, like static electricity from touching a wire. Afterward, she sat back in her chair with her coffee, not the kind of coffee you sip casually, but the one she treats like a ritual. She closed her eyes for a moment, and I thought she was asleep. I debated walking away, but something made me stay. There's a weight to her presence, a gravity I don't understand yet, and I'm drawn to it in a way that's both exhilarating and terrifying. I was just about to pick up a stack of returns when a soft voice startled me. Jonah, can we talk? It wasn't her. Well, not exactly. It was her cousin, or at least someone who sounded like it, leaning in from the edge of the chair. But something in her tone, the gentleness, the careful softness, made me pause. The way she said it made it feel private, urgent, like it belonged only to us, even though we weren't supposed to know each other that well. Claire's eyes fluttered open, and she gave me that same half-smile. There was something unspoken there, a secret I couldn't reach, but couldn't stop thinking about either. Her lips twitched as if she were about to say something, then stopped. Just a glance. Just a pause. And I stood there, hands fidgeting with the edge of a book, heart thumping like I'd run a mile, because I didn't know if the electricity I felt was curiosity, longing, or something else entirely, but I knew I couldn't stop thinking about it. The repair shop smelled like motor oil and coffee, the fluorescent lights humming quietly overhead. Claire was leaning over the counter, scrutinizing a stack of vintage typewriters that needed cleaning. I was crouched beside her, wiping off one of the keys with a damp cloth, careful not to brush too close to her elbow. She didn't speak much, only muttering occasionally under her breath. Her brow furrowed slightly, and I noticed the faint line of fatigue etched under her eyes. She moved with a precision that was almost surgical, but every now and then, her fingers trembled slightly when she reached for a delicate part. That caught my attention more than it should have. I think this one's going to need a full tune-up, she said softly, not looking at me. Her voice carried a kind of exhaustion that was easy to miss unless you were listening. I nodded, trying to keep my own voice neutral. Do you want me to? I started, then stopped. There was a hesitation in her posture, a slight stiffening of her shoulders, that made me pause too. I could feel that wall she kept up, the one she didn't let anyone see past. And for some reason, I wanted to find the cracks in it. She finally glanced at me, just briefly, and for a moment her eyes softened. Thanks, she said, almost inaudible. It wasn't gratitude in the usual way. It was something else. Vulnerability, maybe, or the admission that she couldn't handle it alone. I felt my chest tighten, though I tried not to let it show. She hummed quietly to herself while working, and I realized I was watching her more than the typewriter. The way her hair fell over her face when she bent closer, the small crease at her temple when concentration drew her in, the way her hands moved with care despite the tremor. I couldn't look away. At one point, her pen slipped from her notebook, and she flinched like she'd startled herself. I picked it up and handed it to her. Our fingers brushed, and she looked at me with that same fleeting softness, as if she didn't know how much she wanted to retreat or stay. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice quieter than intended. She paused, hands hovering over the typewriter keys. For a moment, I thought she might say nothing, might brush it off as trivial, but then she gave a half-smile, almost rueful, almost apologetic. "I'm fine," she said, though the slight catch in her voice told a different story. We worked in silence for a few more minutes. The hum of the machines, the faint scent of coffee lingering from her cup, the brush of our hands as I reached across the counter. It all felt heavy, charged. Every small movement seemed amplified, like the air between us had thickened. When she finally leaned back, stretching her arms, I noticed her sigh. A quiet release that wasn't just about the work. It was more, something unsaid. And then, just before I turned back to my task, our eyes met. For a heartbeat, maybe two, there was an unspoken current between us. Nothing overt, no words, just the pull of something forbidden, soft and electric, lingering in the space that was ours alone. I couldn't stop thinking about it, couldn't shake the warmth that spread through me from that brief, silent connection. The cafe was nearly empty when I arrived, the storm outside drumming a steady rhythm against the windows. Claire was already there, a half-drained latte in front of her, hair slightly damp from the rain. The dim light made her features softer, more vulnerable, but the posture she carried, straight-backed, shoulders squared, kept the distance between us intact. We'd been cataloging old books for her private collection, and somehow our conversation had drifted from mundane details to personal stories. She laughed quietly at a memory, a small, tired laugh that made me catch my breath without realizing it. I wanted to reach out, touch her hand, but even in the warmth of the moment, I hesitated. Her notebook lay open between us, a pen balanced in her fingers, tapping lightly against the page. "You ever feel like you're repeating yourself?" she asked, almost whispering. I frowned, unsure what she meant. "Sometimes," I said cautiously. "Why?" She hesitated, and I noticed a flicker in her eyes, a momentary crack in the composed mask. "I don't know," she admitted softly. "Just patterns. Things you don't mean to repeat, but you do." Her confession hung in the air, fragile and intimate. I wanted to respond, to say something that might bridge the invisible line between us, but I didn't. I stayed quiet, letting her words settle. At that exact moment, her phone buzzed against the table. A text from someone labeled X flashed on the screen. Her fingers paused, hovering over it, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face. Hesitation, guilt, maybe longing. She set it aside without looking. The tension in her shoulders deepened, a subtle sign of the emotional weight she carried. The storm intensified, rattling the windows. I moved my chair slightly closer, instinctively, though I still respected the space she seemed to guard. Her hand brushed mine when she reached for her coffee, and I felt the sudden shock of proximity, electric and impossible to ignore. "Jonah," she started, voice trailing, as if she might say something she wasn't supposed to. But then a loud clap of thunder startled both of us. She jumped back slightly, gripping her mug, and I laughed nervously, the moment dissipating like mist. I kept my voice steady. "It's just the storm," I said, though my heart was still racing. She nodded, eyes downcast, and I realized she hadn't finished whatever she was about to say. That small, unspoken confession lingered in the space between us. I could feel the pull of it, the gravity of what might have been if circumstances were different. I wanted to close the distance, to lean in, but I restrained myself. The phone, the storm, the quiet judgment of the empty cafe. It all reminded me that some things weren't mine to take. Still, for a heartbeat, I imagined it, her hand in mine, her eyes meeting mine, and the unspoken acknowledgement of everything simmering beneath the surface. It didn't happen, but the thought of it, the near action, lingered like a pulse I couldn't shake as I poured her another cup of coffee. We were back in the repair shop. The late afternoon sun filtered through dusty windows, casting long, golden shadows across the floor. The smell of oil and paper lingered, comforting and suffocating at the same time. I was crouched near the counter, sorting through small parts, but I kept stealing glances at Claire. She hadn't said much, and I didn't either. Somehow, the silence had grown heavy, almost unbearable. She finally looked up from her notebook, eyes catching mine for longer than usual. The corners of her mouth twitched, not quite a smile, more like the beginning of one that faded into uncertainty. She closed the notebook slowly, as if the action itself carried weight. "Jonah," she said, voice low, careful. I straightened. "Do you ever wonder what we're doing here?" I froze, hands stilling on the small screws in front of me. It wasn't a flirtation. Not really. It was raw, unpolished, a question that didn't have an answer I could give. I think about that sometimes," I admitted, quieter than I expected. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, gaze fixed somewhere beyond me. "I mean this," she said, gesturing vaguely us. "Whatever this is. It's not normal, is it?" I swallowed, heart hammering. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because the weight of her admission pressed down on me. She looked so real, so unguarded. It was almost painful. "I don't know," I said finally. I just know I'm here, that's all." She laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. It was the kind of laugh that carried regret, confusion, longing, maybe even fear. "Being here isn't the same as knowing what we're doing," she said. Her fingers drummed lightly on the counter, and I noticed the way her hands shook just slightly, like she was trying to hold herself together. We didn't speak for a long moment. The hum of the overhead lights, the faint creak of the floorboards, the distant sounds of traffic outside, it all became amplified. Every micro-movement, every glance, every breath carried the tension we couldn't name. I wanted to reach for her, to touch her hand, to say something that might anchor us both, but I didn't. I couldn't. The gravity of her words held me in place. "I shouldn't even be here," she murmured finally, almost to herself. Her eyes met mine again, glistening. "I shouldn't feel like this. But I do." I wanted to tell her it was okay, that none of this was wrong, that I felt it too, but I kept quiet. Because sometimes words ruin things that silence makes holy. She turned away slightly, shoulders tensing. I watched her, feeling every inch of distance between us stretch and strain. Then she whispered, so soft I almost didn't hear it. "I'm scared, Jonah. Scared that if I admit it, everything breaks." And that line hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and relentless. I couldn't answer. I couldn't move. I just stayed there, heart clenching, knowing that nothing would ever feel normal again, not after she said that. The rain had stopped, leaving the city streets slick and reflective, neon lights shimmering in puddles. We were in her apartment now, crouched on the floor amid stacks of old photographs and letters she had been sorting. She moved slowly, almost reverently, handling each photo like it could shatter in her hands. "I never really talk about him," she said quietly, holding up a picture of a man in a suit, smiling at something off camera. Her fingers traced the edge of the photo, lingering. Not even friends, not even family, just locked it away. I stayed silent, crouched nearby, letting her set the pace. The air between us was tight, almost sacred. There was no pressure, no expectation, just the weight of her trust in letting me witness this. He left suddenly," she continued, voice barely above a whisper. "And I blamed myself for a long time." She glanced at me briefly, eyes glimmering, then looked down again. "I shouldn't be telling you this. You can tell me anything." Her voice cracked slightly, and I felt a tightening in my chest. It's stupid, but sometimes, reading it feels like he's still here. Like I could fix things. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure if it helped. I could feel her tremble, a subtle shiver passing through her, and I wanted to reach for her hand, but I hesitated. Just being near her, witnessing this, was enough to make the room feel alive and charged. She let out a slow breath, almost a sigh of relief. I'm not usually like this. Not with anyone. Her eyes met mine, and the vulnerability in them hit me harder than I expected. I don't know why I'm telling you. You're telling me because you trust me, I said gently, more confidently now. Her lips curved in the faintest smile, almost sad, almost hopeful. Maybe, she whispered. Her fingers lingered on the edge of the photograph, not moving, as if afraid to break something fragile. And then, almost without warning, she handed me a small envelope. My name was written in her handwriting. My stomach tightened as I opened it. Inside was a brief note, folded carefully, simple words that made my chest ache. For when you notice too much. For when you stay. I looked up at her, speechless, and she gave me that same fleeting, trembling smile. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive, but it was seismic, an emotional tremor that shifted everything between us in a single, fragile moment. And I stayed there, holding the envelope, trying to steady my own pulse, aware that nothing would feel the same again. We ended up back at the bookstore that night, long after the lights were dimmed and the cleaning crew had gone home. The city outside hummed quietly, neon reflections soft on the rain-slicked pavement, but inside, everything felt suspended. Just her, me, and the faint scent of old paper. We were sitting on the floor, knees brushing lightly as we stacked books we'd cataloged. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of everything we hadn't said, everything we had been circling for weeks. I glanced at her, noticing again the faint curve of her lips when she concentrated, the way her hair fell in gentle waves across her shoulder. I don't know how we ended up here, she said quietly, voice barely above a whisper. Not lost, not confused, just honest. Neither do I admitted, my hand brushing a stray page she hadn't noticed. But it feels right. Her eyes flicked to mine, searching, measuring, but she didn't speak. She didn't need to. The acknowledgement hung in the air, fragile but undeniable. We had been careful for weeks, circling this unspoken territory, and now the space between us felt inevitable. She shifted slightly, and our knees pressed together for a moment longer than necessary. I could feel her warmth, steady and familiar, and it made the room feel smaller in a comforting way. A small, natural intimacy, earned through patience, through observing and noticing, through all the quiet moments we had shared. She leaned forward to reach for a stack of books, and our hands brushed. It was soft, fleeting, but it was enough. Her fingers lingered on mine for just a heartbeat before pulling back slightly, and I caught the ghost of a smile on her lips. No grand gestures, no dramatic declarations, just presence. I'm glad you're here, she murmured, almost to herself. Me too, I said, matching her quiet tone. The silence stretched, comfortable now. No pressure, no performance, just two people who had weathered their own hesitations and fears, who had noticed each other's flaws and vulnerabilities and chosen to stay anyway. I shifted closer, careful not to rush it, and she didn't move away. Our foreheads almost touched, close enough to feel each other's breath. And in that simple proximity, the tension of weeks, the unspoken longing, the quiet collapse of resistance, all of it settled into something steady, gentle, and real. We didn't need to label it. We didn't need to define it. The moment itself said more than words ever could. Her hand brushed mine again, softer this time, and I let my fingers intertwine with hers naturally. She didn't pull away. She didn't smile overtly. She just rested her head lightly against my shoulder. And that was it. That quiet, earned connection. The collapse of restraint. The acknowledgement of what had been building silently all along. We sat like that for a long while. The bookstore empty except for the quiet rustle of pages, the faint scent of coffee lingering from earlier. No words, just presence. No declarations, just understanding. And in that shared space, with the world outside muted and irrelevant, I knew we were here. Together. It's been months since that night in the bookstore, yet I can still feel the quiet weight of it, like a bookmark pressed between pages I'll never forget. Sitting here now, sorting through my own stack of books at home, I realize how much has shifted inside me, inside her, inside the way we understand what we feel. Claire hasn't changed in the obvious ways. She still carries herself with that calm, effortless confidence, still notices details most people miss. But now, I see the softness beneath that armor more clearly. The hesitations, the moments she almost lets someone in, she doesn't hide them from me anymore. And I've learned to see them, not as flaws or weaknesses, but as the subtle language of someone who's lived, hurt, and kept moving anyway. For me, I've grown too. Patience isn't a word I used lightly before, but now it's a muscle I exercise daily. I've learned to watch, to listen, to understand without needing to fix everything. And that, surprisingly, is enough. Being near her, noticing her, letting her notice me back without forcing the moment, that has changed the way I think about love. Not loud, not perfect, not immediate, but something that can exist quietly and fully if you're willing to stay present. We still have our routines. The bookstore on rainy nights, quiet dinners that stretch into hours, the slow, deliberate cataloging of old letters and photographs. And yet, there's something in those moments that wasn't there before. The energy between us doesn't need to speak loudly. It hums in the small touches, the shared glances, the pauses where words would be too much. We've learned to let the silences carry as much meaning as the words. Sometimes I catch her looking at me and think I see the same reflection of this slow-burning understanding that I feel. The gratitude, the relief, the cautious wonder that someone has stayed, really stayed, through all the hesitation, all the quiet fear. And I realize that love doesn't always need grand gestures or proclamations. Sometimes it grows in observation, in gentle patience, in the tiny ways you choose someone day after day. There's still tension, sure, curiosity, longing, the inevitable moments when the world outside nudges us with reminders of reality. But the difference now is that neither of us is pretending anymore. We're allowed to exist in this space between desire and restraint, learning, noticing, choosing. Every glance, every brush of hands, every shared silence feels intentional without needing to be explained. And in that, finally, there's a peace I didn't know I could feel. The other night, she leaned against me quietly, forehead resting on my shoulder, and I realized I didn't need to say anything. She didn't either. That small, simple act said everything I ever wanted to know about what we've become. And I can't stop thinking about it. About her. About us. About the way life can sneak in little, earn miracles if you're willing to stay awake to them. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?